Hello!
Wow.
You're listening to The Dollop. This is a bi-weekly American history podcast. Each week, I read a story to my friend.
Gareth Reynolds, who has no idea what the topic will be about.
This is it. This is what people have been waiting for. I wish I could have spent more time on this, but I wanted to do it before Marin started. The Iraq War. Here we go.
Needless to say, I've got butterflies.
I don't need to shout out the date that all kicked off on.
No, you could shout at the president who kicked it off.
President George W. Bush told his crew to start planning for an invasion of Iraq just months after 9/11.
I already am so pissed.
The man who began planning at the Pentagon was named Douglas Feith. He was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and ran a super double secret office called the Office of Special Plan.
The Office of Special Plan?
Yep, it was, it's kind of a stupid name.
It's really a stupid name.
It's a terrible name.
The Office of because it's just singular.
It is singular. It should be Office of Special Planning.
I mean, at least something, some action.
Office
or
of the Iraq Plan, or
the room.
But this sounds like a.
I'm the vice president of Yes.
Feith was a big fan of a man named Ahmad Chalabi. Ahmad Chalabi was an Iraqi exile who ran a political organization called the Iraqi National Congress. Chalabi was a mathematician who had attended MIT and was hated at the State Department and the CIA.
Interesting.
Both considered Chalabi to be corrupt and very unpopular with Iraqis. But neocons like Feith loved Chalabi. He was the shit because he told them everything they wanted to hear, like that Iraq could be a secular democracy, that it would embrace the West and recognize Israel.
We'd be greeted as liberators.
Naturally, this was the Cheney-Rumsfeld-Feith dream leader of Iraq once Saddam was gone. Feith's office was very secret, double secret.
Jesus Christ.
Super double special secret.
Get it, secret.
He did not coordinate with the State Department or the CIA.
I mean, just even that, right? Like, how is that even possible?
He really didn't like focusing on worst-case scenarios, and that's one of the things the State Department and CIA did.
Yeah, that really is, right? That's basically what they do.
That's their job!
Yeah.
Total negative Nancy's, those groups.
Yeah, really.
If you talked about the negatives, then people might not want to invade Iraq, and we couldn't have that, could we?
No.
Feith's office looked at the war as to be one of liberation, and he believed it would be really easy.
Yeah.
Super easy. The Iraqis wouldn't need much assistance after Saddam was gone and would quickly take over running the country.
God, I remember just hearing it all. Hearing all of this being said and thinking, you're just thinking like, that just doesn't seem right.
But then it turned out to be.
But then, it did. Yeah, history has judged it fondly.
2 months before the invasion, Feith called Jay Garner, a retired lieutenant general. He asked Garner to run Iraq after the invasion and get things transitioned into Iraqi hands.
Sure.
Feith told Garner it would take around 90 days.
That's just... I mean, it's like we're remodeling a kitchen.
You can't do anything in 90 days.
I mean, honestly. Like, you could redo your bathroom.
You couldn't even then.
No, you could.
Because shit would come up and the contractor would have to get the wrong pipes.
You could go from a shitty bathroom to a nice bathroom
in 90 days.
In 90 days, yes. Yeah. I bet you my brother could do it in 60.
Garner accepted the position, and his group was called the Office of Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance, or ORHA. Garner set about trying to get things ready, but Feith did not give him any plans or reports. He did not get any of these State Department plans or the analysis from the CIA. He didn't even get the unclassified report written by the military's own National Defense University based on a 2-day workshop involving more than 70 scholars and experts. Ugh. He got nothing. When Garner asked Feith for some documents, Feith told them that nothing useful existed.
Nah, there's nothing. We should go in.
The guy who needs to fucking do everything, you're like, nah, you don't need any paperwork.
I don't need that.
What do you need stuff for?
Well, you're a real bookworm, huh?
I'm a reader. I like to read stuff. Just get in there and get your hands dirty.
Get in there. Just say yes. When there's a yes stamp in there, just use your yes stamp.
Feith figured that with no reports, Garner would just end up talking to Chalabi.
Which is what happened. No.
Feith also never planned to have American experts ready to run Iraqi ministries. After the war, he figured Iraqi civil servants would just jump in and run everything.
I just can't. I mean, it is just...
Garner got to work putting a team together and making plans. 2 days before leaving for Iraq, Garner was called to Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's office, and Rumsfeld questioned Garner why he had hired the people he had hired, especially the people from the State Department. Quote, "I'm just uncomfortable with these people," said Rumsfeld. And Garner asked, well, who from the Department of Defense do you have that's qualified to do agriculture? And Rumsfeld just stared at him. How about education? Rumsfeld did not have an answer. Garner went down the list of people he needed. Banking? Rumsfeld finally said, look, I'm not going to argue with you on this one, but I'm going to get you other people.
What? That is arguing. That's totally arguing with him.
Rumsfeld then blocked all senior State Department people Garner had hired.
What the fuck?
He said they were too bureaucratic.
They must have been like, well...
The Pentagon wanted as few State Department people on the team as possible because anyone from the State Department understood worst-case scenario and would immediately raise red flags about the planning.
Jesus Christ.
On March 19th, 2003, the invasion of Iraq began.
What a time.
It went pretty smooth.
Yeah, shock and awe.
Aside from all the dead people and the destruction.
Yeah, well, no, but when you're doing shock and awe, you're gonna have some dead people.
Girl,
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's the shock part.
That's and the awe.
Yeah, and the awe. As in you're like, oh wow, oh, why did we do that?
It wasn't much of a fight. The elite forces put up resistance, but when the fighting started, the regular army just put on their civilian clothes and went home. They had been told not to fight by dropped leaflets. The vast majority were not loyal to Saddam anyway, but loyal to their country. And they said they would just wait around for new orders after the U.S. took over.
Okay.
On April 9th, an army tank toppled a huge statue of Saddam.
Yep.
That was the big moment of the war. It was now over in the Iraqis' eyes, right?
Yeah, well, the statue came down.
Yeah.
We're peaking right now, right?
This is good times,
This is as good as it got.
This is as good as it got.
This is when you were watching it and you were like, well, shit, this actually did go pretty well.
Yeah, it went okay.
Shit.
And then the looting started. God. They began at the Ministry of Industry's headquarters. There were no U.S. troops guarding the ministries, so the looters went after the building like the Rube went after a fire truck.
Oh, God.
They tore it apart. Before the war, Baghdad was a hopping place. Shops stayed open till 10, restaurants till midnight. Nobody worried about driving home late at night. It was an incredibly safe city because Saddam would lock your shit up or cut off your hands for the smallest crime. It was like Vegas in the 60s.
Yeah.
Now the opposite was happening. Total chaos and no one in charge. When the looting began, the ORHA ministers watched on television and assumed the military was on their way to protect the buildings. But it wasn't. No troops had been assigned to guard the ministries, and there was still no consideration to put troops there even after the looting started.
How is that possible?
Only ministry being protected by American troops was the Ministry of Oil.
Ugh.
It's so obviously, it's so obviously transparent. Like it's so fantastically.
How is it so transparent?
It's so fantastic. When asked about why the looting wasn't stopped, Rumsfeld said, "Freedom's untidy."
He is great with that stuff.
You could put that in as a phrase that a Marvel villain would say.
He's got tons. Have you ever seen
the streets became a free for all? By the time it was over,
a freedom for all.
The ORHA believed the looting had caused more damage to Iraq's infrastructure than the entire bombing campaign. One man running the Ministry of Health named Carney only had 2 people as his staff. There were over 100,000 employees at the ministry, and he didn't have a budget.
Wait, he had 100,000 people on his staff?
He was brought in to take over the Ministry of Health.
Uh-huh.
There were 100,000 employees.
Uh-huh.
And it's just him.
Oh my God.
Garner said about putting together a plan for how much power to give the Iraqis and when he would hand them back the power of their country. Meanwhile, the Pentagon, the State Department, and the White House had not agreed to anything. Cheney and Rumsfeld wanted Chalabi to take over, obviously, and Bush and Rice didn't know what they wanted, which is great. When Garner arrived in Iraq, he thought elections should be held within 90 days, as he was told. And he told the press that. Then Rumsfeld and Feith flipped out and were pissed off at him because they thought an election wouldn't leave Chalabi in charge. And the White House was also upset, so they fired Garner. And
good. Get him out.
They decided to hire what is called a take charge kind of fella.
Wait, no. Okay. Okay.
This is the guy no one knows about. Okay. Or people don't talk about. Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, and Rice had a meeting and tossed out different names. Rudy Giuliani, but he had just opened up a consulting firm. They went over former governors and ex-senators, but they couldn't agree. And then Cheney suggested Paul Bremer. And that was that. He was a company man, Republican with lots of experience. He worked for Kissinger. You know, all the good shit.
Yeah. Good track record.
He was a rich kid who went to Yale and then got a degree in business from Harvard and then went to get another degree in Paris. He joined the Foreign Service.
I just got a degree in Paris for whatever.
He worked in the State Department, was stationed in Norway and in Kabul, Afghanistan, but he spent a lot of time in the U.S. at the State Department. He was moving up the ranks. Reagan then appointed him ambassador to the Netherlands.
A really valuable position.
Guess what he didn't speak?
Dutch.
Yep.
Yeah.
At the time of the 9/11 attacks, he worked for a business with 1,700 other employees in the North Tower of the World Trade Center above where the second plane hit. So, ORHA was done. Bremer would be the new head of an organization called the Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA.
Coalition Provisional Authority, okay.
Bremer hit the ground running. He'd meet at 8 with his staff every day. People were told to make their points in 30 seconds or less, and he'd make a decision just as quickly.
That's
my friend,
more like a game show.
That is
not a political.
That is
ideology.
how you rebuild a country.
No, 30 seconds or less. Welcome back to 30 Seconds or Less. Today we're going to try to rebuild Iraq through ideas that are pitched in under 30 seconds. And then Paul Bremer has 30 seconds to decide if he wants to enact that or not. 30 seconds or less. Your time starts now. Well,
I want to rebuild a bridge. We need to get a consulting firm to come in and rebuild the bridge. And what we need is we need security seconds around the bridge. And we're also going to need 10 seconds. We're going to need a new kind of.
No.
God damn it!
Bridge.
It's a really important bridge. Sorry,
your 30 seconds is up. I'm sorry, sir.
I'm over 30.
30 Seconds or Less is brought to you by Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, he used to be the glue that nobody respected.
In May 2003, Bremer sent Rumsfeld a report made by RAND, a U.S. military think tank and military contractor. It said that 500,000 troops were needed to stabilize Iraq. That was 3 times more than were currently in Iraq, and Rumsfeld just ignored it.
So that's the problem, right? Is that it's just like it's not. The problem wasn't the not knowing of the facts. The problem was not wanting to deal with the facts.
And now Bremer had a plan. It was a 3-part plan. First, he wanted to restore electricity, water, and other basic services.
Jesus, yes.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Next, he wanted to, quote, put liquidity in the hand of the people. So, he's talking about reopening banks, offering loans, paying salaries, etc. The third part of his awesome plan was to, quote, corporatize and privatize state-owned enterprises.
Now, which one of those? Okay.
He wanted to get people away from the idea that the state should support everything. It was time for Iraq to experience the awesomeness of a free market economy in a country where huge amounts of people have been living off the government for their entire lives. Now he only needed to go to the White House for really big things, and everything else he could make a decision on his own. This is how you rebuild a country.
How is
11 days after he got to Iraq, Bremer dissolved, because now he can make whatever decision he wants.
Sure.
He dissolved the Army, Air Force, Navy, Ministry of Defense, and the Iraqi Intelligence Service. No biggie. It's no big deal. Just all of the...
Aren't those...
The military?
Isn't that... I mean, yeah, the military. Yeah. The military's a good one to start with.
No biggie, right? Meanwhile, Powell thought Bremer was nuts. And so he got the few lower-level State Department personnel who were working for the CPA to write memos to the State Department using their personal email, like Hotmail or Yahoo, so they couldn't be detected.
Wow.
As far as staff, Bremer chose 3 Republican advisors who had been around a long time and had experience. The rest of the posts were filled with young Republican yes people. For the vast majority This was their first job working in government, and they all believed very strongly in building a democratic Iraq. Yeah. So Bremer, so he says he's going to make some bold decisions. He did. When he got to Iraq in his first meeting, he said they should shoot looters. He was somehow talked out of this great idea.
Well, I think I'm just going to say that the catchphrase I'll have is how.
Then someone mentioned de-Baathification, which was the purging senior members of Saddam's Ba'ath Party from the government. Bremer was so for it. The CIA and State Department were super not for it. They wanted what was called de-Saddamification, getting rid of those who were very top commanders and those who had committed crimes. So Bush met with the CIA, the State, and Pentagon, and everyone argued, and in the end, the NSC came up with a compromise. The top 1% of Baathists would be purged, and then the rest of the party would have to go through a truth and reconciliation process, basically vetting them, okay?
Okay.
Bush was down with it. So that was that.
Sorry. So the plan is to take the top 1% of Baathists.
Right, the really bad guys.
Right, and use them.
No, get rid of them. They're
get rid
gone.
of them. Okay.
And then the rest of them, you vet them and make sure that they weren't.
Right, the rest of them you put through like some sort of Scientology class where they hold the rod and,
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
The cool thing was that the NSC had no idea how the Ba'ath Party was structured, or how many people were on each level, or what each level meant, or anything. They could have looked up this information on the internet, or read papers about the party. All of this information was easily available to anyone, particularly those people who had just invaded and needed that information, but nobody read it.
But how? How do you... How...
It just takes time.
How do you
my daughter has a recital.
How do you not just by discussion of this?
So here's how the Ba'ath Party was structured. There were 4 top levels of the Ba'ath Party. Below that were just regular members and cadets. The top 4 levels were the concern, right?
Uh-huh.
But Bush had made his decision, and they were basically going to be vetted. Okay? Nope. Feith got together with Chalabi, and they came up with their own de-Baathification plan.
So,
what?
So somebody's out bad planning W?
Well, the president has made his decision, but then this other guy,
like,
the Department of Defense, decided
Me and Chalabi actually spitballed a little, and we don't need to do all that stuff. Chalabi's got us.
In theirs, all 4 levels of the Ba'ath Party and group members known as the Udu Furqa would be purged. Bremer met with Feith, and because this was one of those great 30-second ideas, he jumped on it. Bremer had said he wanted to make bold decisions, and this was So Feith just printed up 1.5-page executive order of his plan, and including banning regular members of the Ba'ath Party from having top-level jobs in government. He showed it to Rumsfeld, but not Powell or Rice. When Garner read the report, he almost shit himself. He thought it was the dumbest and craziest thing he'd ever read. He ran into Bremer's office and said, "This is too harsh. Let's get Rumsfeld on the phone and see if we can soften it." And Bremer looked at him and said, "Absolutely not. We are going to issue this today." Garner pleaded, "You're going to drive 50,000 Baathists underground before nightfall. Don't do this." The CIA station chief in Baghdad said, "In 6 months, you'll regret this." De-Baathification of Iraqi society, or as it can now be called, the creation of the insurgency and the biggest post, was read by Bremer.
Why is it called that one?
Because read by Bremer to his CPA staff that night. One guy said, "The Baathists are the brains of the government, the ones with a lot of information and knowledge and understanding of how everything works. If they're purged, the CPA will have a huge problem running anything." But what did Browning know? He was only in charge of running 5 ministries at that time.
Oh, Jesus.
Bremer said the order is not open for discussion. Look, the 30 seconds are up, bro.
Sorry, bro.
30
You're
seconds
not going
happened.
to the lightning round.
Another staffer asked Bremer if he completely understood the impact his policy would have. As she continued on, she grew angrier and her face red as she spoke. And Bremer finally cut her off and said the decision was made and left. That night, David Nummy, who was currently working... Nummy.
Mr. Nummy.
Who was currently working at the finance ministry, called Bremer's office and told the staffer, quote, "If you want me to enforce this, I'm leaving on the next plane out of the country because it's ill-advised and you have no idea how far back it's going to set us. If those people disappear and we don't have the tools to find the next generation, Bremer did it anyway. Nummy was gone within a month. The purge was on. The order went public. That was 700,000 government workers who were used to being in power, who were turned against the U.S. occupation overnight. The next day, at the health ministry, 8 of the top 12 jobs were vacant. 1/3 of the entire staff of the ministry was gone.
Oh, my God.
And now at the ministries, Americans were spending all their time investigating who was and who wasn't a Ba'ath Party member to finish the purge. They poured over records and fired more Iraqis instead of doing things like starting factories up and getting workers paid and making the country secure. Yeah. Feith and Bremer had managed to turn everyone into a guy shuffling through paperwork. Oh, and they were purging innocent people. The Ba'ath Party wasn't like the Democratic Party in the U.S. You couldn't turn down a promotion in the Ba'ath Party under Saddam, or you would be sentenced to years in prison. So these guys had to be Ba'ath Party members,
right? So that what do you do when you purge? That's
it. They're gone.
Just done.
They can never get a job in government again. Okay. So they're like, go work at a gas station. There's no gas. Just go. Because of the purge, 15,000 teachers were fired.
Oh my God. what is
well, this is what happens when you don't. This is what happens when you don't read.
It really is. It is a makeover show, but we just don't have the contractor or the plan to rebuild.
No, but
we're just knocking down everything.
You have the guy to knock it down,
and then we're like, oh, we forgot to get a guy to build the shit.
Under Saddam, the Ministry of Education had told all teachers to join the Ba'ath Party, and in Sunni areas, entire schools now had just like 2 teachers. Bremer realized this was actually not good and set up a commission to hear appeals from teachers. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And he put Chalabi in charge of the commission.
Oh, God.
Who made sure the appeals weren't heard.
Right. Okay, good.
Bremer was cool with it because he considered the de-Baathification to be, quote, the single most important thing we've done here.
Oh, my God.
So a shitload of people are out of work. And then 2 days after the purge order, Bush decided to disband the Republican Guard. They were the elite forces believed to be loyal to Saddam. The regular army guys could stay, though. Right? So the army is still intact. They didn't even fight during the invasion. But where were they? Mm-hmm. Every military base was empty. Not one Iraqi military unit was intact. Apparently their leaders had been asking since the invasion ended what the army should do, but not one American answered. For some reason, the Pentagon assumed the soldiers would just stay in their barracks and wait until they were told what to do. Instead, they went home to their families because, there's a... You know what a war is?
Yeah. Oh, do we?
So they did what Americans wanted. They took off their uniforms and they went home and they went to their families.
And then they were like, "Fuck, I guess I'll just live at home now."
So instead of sitting around with no food or supplies in hot barracks with no electricity, the U.S. also sort of forgot to tell them that they should stay at the barracks. So now the bases were all empty and looted, and Feith looked at the situation and decided the regular army shouldn't be called back. And Bremer agreed. So instead of vetting and assessing all the soldiers and figuring out which ones to bring back, they were just tossed aside, even though they had all been waiting around for orders, thinking they were still part of the army. So they didn't fight. They stood aside. They let an army invade, and then they lost their ability to support their families. So that's another 300,000 men tossed to the streets. So that's 1 million. Right now, that's 1 million, if you're counting. And even worse, the Iraqi army was considered the glue of Iraq. It helped to hold together all the desperate ethnic and religious groups by stressing national identity.
Yeah.
And it was gone. This was a great move also because unemployment was at 40%. Lieutenant General David McKiernan
40%
said of the order, quote, "There are a large number of Iraqi soldiers now unemployed. This is a huge concern." Soldiers protested by the thousands. They had lost their jobs, their pensions, their source of pride. They just wanted their jobs back. But apparently firing guys who took their guns home was the call to make. During one protest, 2 Iraqi officers were shot by U.S. troops, which further infuriated all of the laid-off soldiers. Bremer was slow to react, and when a new army was finally created, the old soldiers weren't given preference, and they only made an army of 40,000. Months later, a reporter saw one of the protesters, and he asked, "What happened to everyone there? Did they join the new army?" And the soldier laughed. "They're all insurgents now." 72 hours after the decision was made.
So we just turned the army into. We just made the army turn against us.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to say us anymore.
72 hours after the army was let go, the first major attack from the airport road took place. One furious U.S. general said, "You guys blindsided CENTCOM. We snatched defeat from the jaws of victory and created an insurgency." Another said, "We made hundreds of thousands of people very angry at us, and they happen to be the people in the country best acquainted with the use of firearms." Also, the insurgency meant people had a job again.
Something to do.
The insurgents offered unemployed ex-soldiers or ex-Baathists up to $100 to shoot Americans or plant landmines.
I mean, that's crazy.
If they filmed the killing of an American, they got a bonus. Bremer then met with the leading exiles and told them he had decided there would be no interim government. The U.S. would continue to occupy, and he was the viceroy and totally in charge.
Oh, my God.
He just anointed himself king. The Iraqis weren't pleased. He then put together a council of 25 Iraqis who would just advise him and write a new constitution, but Bremer would have the final decision on everything. Meanwhile, he ignored a guy named Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani, who was the big dog when it came to Islamic law in the country. After it became obvious he shouldn't ignore the Ayatollah, Bremer finally sent a man to meet with Sistani.
Okay.
Someone with more experience. right?
Whatever you're about to say is not going to be good.
A pharmaceutical executive from Michigan.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Is the idea that you just literally can't send anybody who's not just kind of corrupt? Like,
The Ayatollah was not impressed. He then issued a fatwa.
you know who we should...
It said that Iraq's constitution had to be written by elected representatives, and the committee Bremer had picked was unacceptable. No one at the CPA decided to give a shit about the fatwa. They figured, and this is a quote from one of Bremer's aides, "The view was, we'll just get someone to write another fatwa."
Wait.
I can't.
Wait. Sorry.
The Ayatollah issued a fatwa saying that they had to hold elections to write a constitution, and they wanted to just get a different guy to do a different fatwa.
So they're
Like a
out
counter,
fatwa'd?
like a counter fatwa.
They got counter fatwa'd?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That's a first.
Well,
right?
they think this is crossfire.
Right. Okay, that's fair.
Now, some foresight did happen, just not by the Pentagon or the White House or the CPA. Before the war, the Justice Department actually hired a guy who was perfect for the job. He had experience rebuilding police forces in conflict zones. His name was Richard Myers. Way before the invasion, he said they would need 5,000 law enforcement advisors to come and train the police. Of course, that idea was rejected.
Of course.
The Pentagon had just assumed the police would keep working after the invasion.
Interesting. Like the army.
But weird thing is they all fled when the invasion started.
Sure.
So no cops anywhere. At this point, experts said 7,000 police were needed immediately. The White House sent fewer.
Like,
A lot fewer. 6,999 fewer.
dude, what?
They sent one person.
Was it RoboCop?
Bernie Kerik, former New York police commander,
that-
former military vet,
Oh, God.
oversaw the NYPD during 9/11, and he would later go to jail for 4 years
Yeah.
for 8 counts, including criminal conspiracy. As a bonus, Kerik had zero experience in a post-war zone, although the White House believed his total lack of experience was an asset.
That's an amazing way to be. That's an amazing thing to think.
The entire time in Iraq, Kerik held a total of 2 staff meetings.
Oh, my God.
One the week he arrived, and the other when a New York Times reporter was following him and doing a story on him.
Wow.
Bernie never seemed to understand where he was. He shared an office with the CPA's Interior Ministry, who often met with Iraqis. Bernie came into the office one day and saw Iraqis around talking to people and loudly said, "Who the fuck are these people?"
Oh, Jesus.
And someone said, "Oh, those are Iraqis." Well, what the fuck are they doing here?
Oh, cool.
Bernie, that's
their country.
That's the reason we're here. It's their country.
They're everywhere.
Bernie cut his 6
It's
months.
like jumping into the ocean and asking why all the fish are.
What's with all these things? These things with the flippers. Bernie cut his 6-month tour in half. After 3 months, he left Iraq. He didn't tell most of the people that worked for him that he was leaving. He was just gone one day.
Wow. He ghosted them.
He totally ghosted them.
Wow. Awesome.
Now that the CPA was getting people into positions, they needed to get things fixed and to get people working again. The CPA needed 150 factories that were owned by the Ministry of Industry looked over to figure out which would work.
Okay.
They hired a man named Glenn Corliss to do the job. Corliss was one of the few who came with actual experience to a job that needed it. He'd worked on Wall Street and was known for bringing back companies from the brink.
Okay.
So he arrives, and here's the conversation that took place on that day.
Great.
CPA. Okay, you have 150 factories. We want you to evaluate them. Corliss. Where's my staff? Well, it's you. Okay, where's the management of the companies? We fired the management because of debathification. Where are the financials? There are no financials. How much time do I have? 2 weeks.
What?
150 factories. He has no staff. He has no money. He has to do it in 2 weeks.
What? Everything sounds like a reality show. It's like a movie plot. He's 2 weeks. What is it?
2 weeks, 150 companies?
Okay.
So here's how the companies worked under Saddam. They were state-owned, but a factory job was a government job, and you got a nice salary for the rest of your life.
Okay.
Many people employed at factories didn't even have anything to do. They just sat around, employed.
Sure.
The salary was low, but the government took care of everything. Gasoline was almost free, electricity was free, college was free, healthcare was free. People got food every month from the government. So that's how they're living their life. Mm-hmm. So you had a whole society basically living off of the government. And it was the only thing they knew. They had been doing this for decades. So when Corliss told them their system was screwed up, they looked at him like he was insane.
Yeah.
Corliss quickly realized privatization was not happening.
Yeah.
If they sold out the factories, many people would lose their jobs, just increasing the already massive unemployment numbers. There wasn't even electricity or raw materials to work with. Many of the factories were worthless already. They should just be shut down, but Corliss recommended shutting them down and then continuing to pay the employees forever. Because you can't just get rid of, because there's so many unemployed, and the factories don't actually make anything.
Well,
so he's like, well, just fire them, just get rid of the companies and just keep paying them, and hopefully they'll start their own businesses or something.
Jesus Christ.
The guy above Corliss who made the call and stuff like that was named Peter McPherson. He'd been the president of Michigan University, worked under Reagan in international development for 7 years, was VP at Bank of America, and most importantly, he was buddies with Dick Cheney.
Yeah,
and he strongly believed that it was very important to shrink government employment, not increase it. The faster they could eliminate subsidies and get privatization going, the quicker shit would turn around.
Well, but
he had only asked for 130 days leave from Michigan University, so he was thinking he could crank this shit out in 4 months.
He's really he's on board.
McPherson believed strongly the way to cure all problem was to reduce taxes and privatize. Oh.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I just love how we're like, yeah, Reaganomics. That's what you guys need.
We went into a country and said Reaganomics.
Reaganomics.
Also, CPA lawyers said privatizing the factories would violate the Hague Convention. So he thought the good companies would now flourish. He looked at everything that way. A lot of police cars had been stolen and turned into taxis. Good, he said. Privatization.
Good. Hey,
that's privatization.
Democracy in motion.
Bus drivers are now driving their own routes and just pocketing the money and keeping the buses.
Hey, privatization.
Privatization.
Man. Yeah.
So this stuff's all good. But there were a couple of big problems. Debt. Iraq's banks were $1 million in debt. So McPherson just wiped out all the debts from government-run businesses.
Okay.
And anyone who knows anything about business knows that weak companies usually owe strong companies money. So now the factories that had actually been profitable suddenly had no money.
Oh, good.
And a bunch of companies that were shit had money or usually just goods that they had bought from the strong companies.
Right.
Like one company now had a giant mountain of free cotton that they could use to make clothing, but they were a shit company.
Right. So they just made
They
shit.
just had free. Right. They had free cotton.
Right.
So overnight, he destroyed every strong government-run company.
Jesus.
It's so great. McPherson then did what every Iraqi had been waiting for since the tanks rolled into Baghdad.
Left.
He cut the top tax rate from 45% to a flat tax of 15%.
Okay.
Boom. Right?
Yeah.
Most Iraqis didn't pay taxes. Now, we're 6 months into the occupation, and assaults on the Green Zone begin.
Oh.
All those released Iraqi soldiers and fire people finally found something to do. Suddenly, the people who worked for the CPA started to have an actual look around at what was going on, and they were forced to do this because bombs were coming over the walls of their secure zone.
Well, I guess they didn't know about the Green Zone. It's like Ghoul in Tag. Can't tag me. I'm on Ghoul.
Cool. They realized this wasn't good, and it suddenly started to dawn on them that without security, they couldn't make liberal arts colleges or privatize the factories or get election going.
Yeah, I mean, the ballerinas are going to be really affected by this. Yeah, for sure.
The entire time the CPA was in Iraq, the CPA actually had no idea how many people worked for the CPA.
Okay. I mean, like...
This made it hard for them to ask for more people. One CPA administrator said, quote, "We never had a good grip on how many people were in the CPA. Sometimes people just showed up in Baghdad, and sometimes people just left."
What?
"Hey, I'm working for you guys." Okay.
I'm going to leave now. All right.
It ended up taking 6 months to get CPA staff into all 18 Iraq provinces. And when they did get the staff there, the staff were so small they were completely overwhelmed, rendering them almost pointless. They needed a lot more staff everywhere. In May 2003, the regional coordinator for South Iraq wrote, "Our window for influencing the course of events in the South will be gone in 2 to 3 weeks." In 2 to 3 weeks it was. Of course, despite reality being smashed into his face, Bremer continued to push for privatization.
What?
He thought it was, quote, essential for Iraq's economic recovery. But the factories at this point were a train wreck. Fayez Aziz ran a government vegetable oil company. He had fired a lot of men before, and they were demanding their jobs back. They were saying, quote, "Either you get us back to work or we're going to do something." One day, a former employee came into Aziz's office with a hand grenade and demanded his job back or he would blow them both up. Aziz managed to talk the man down. It didn't matter. 2 days later, Aziz was pulled from his car and gunned down in the street by 8 men.
Ugh.
Now, this changed everything. Privatization suddenly looked like it would be more difficult than everyone thought. If they fired thousands of workers, what would happen? Fortunately, the dream of Bush and company was still alive. Tom Foley arrived 2 weeks after Aziz was killed. His job, to work on private sector development.
Ugh.
He was an investment banker who had gone to Harvard with President Bush, and he had a bold plan. He wanted to privatize all of Iraq's state-owned businesses in 30 days.
Again, reality show.
What? A contractor told him it couldn't be done because, for one reason, international law prevents the sale of assets by an occupational government. Foley responded, "I don't care about any of that stuff. I don't give a shit about international law. I made a commitment to the president that I'd privatize Iraq's business."
Wow. Yeah, what a great...
But Foley was forced to face facts after the killing with the state of the factories, the debt debacle. It became clear quickly that selling off the factories was a bad idea. Oh, and illegal.
Right.
He decided to lease them instead, which he was very sad about. The only hitch was that any investor leasing a factory had to agree to not fire any employees.
I mean, that is not going to go down well.
Strangely, no one stepped forward to lease a factory. One would think that without adequate electricity, an internet, terrible phone service, an airport that still wasn't open, and violence increasing by the day, that companies would jump to lease a business.
Yeah, let's go. Get out there. Get involved. Meet the people.
But they didn't.
Put your goods on display.
Now, being a master of timing, Bremer then decided it was the moment to deal with all the food rations the Iraqis got from the government.
Oh, good. Finally, let's start toying with that.
Look, tons of people are out of work and joining the insurgency every day. What's the best thing to do right now?
Get rid of their food.
So
make it hard for them to eat.
He decided the government shouldn't hand out food, as had been happening for decades, but instead the government should give out debit cards, and then private companies could distribute the food. Well, there's one problem with the plan.
No, the plan is the problem.
No one in Iraq used credit cards or debit cards.
I don't understand why.
What?
Like, why?
What? This is a good idea.
Why would you go there and be like, let's turn this place into the Fifth Element? Let's really have a little fun here. Like they don't know what those are. You give them food. Food.
There were no ATMs.
You've definitely killed someone they're related to, and you've definitely killed a friend of theirs.
There were no ATMs.
So then what are they going to...
And there wouldn't be for a long time because there wasn't consistent electricity or phone service. So basically they would be giving people a magic piece of plastic that trapped their money inside of it.
Riot.
It's like giving people, like you give them all a thing to ride a water slide on.
Right.
Okay, everybody, here's the water slide cloth that you ride on. And everyone's like, there's no water slides.
Use your cloth.
Use your cloth, buddy. There's no slide to ride it on. Then the military heard about the idea and immediately killed it because they did not like the idea of food riots.
Yeah.
Slowly, the country began to completely destabilize. The Shiites in Baghdad slums started fighting U.S. forces. And not just a little bit. This is full-on fighting. All the while,
But
Bremer...
at least they're getting along finally.
Yep. All the while, Bremer tried to put together some sort of functioning government. This usually just led to more fighting.
Good.
While all this was going on, the insurgency in the Sunni-dominated west of the country increased because those were the people most affected by the de-Baathification and the firing of workers.
Good.
For the first time ever, the country of Iraq was breaking off into different ethnic and religious groups. Previously, they had thought of themselves as Iraqis first. Now that was gone. Meanwhile, Bremer was having problems. He had formed the Iraq Governing Council to create a constitution. All the members of the Governing Council had supported the American invasion of Iraq.
Good.
Grand Ayatollah Sistani had said the Constitution had to be drafted by elected politicians. Bremer did not want that because he wanted the new Constitution to have the separation of church and state in it. Fucking insane.
Jesus Christ.
So the U.S. now found itself in the rather awkward position of an Iraqi religious leader calling for democracy and the U.S. working to stop democracy.
Wow. I mean, that says a lot.
By September 2003, the population was done with the occupation. Things were far worse than they had been under Saddam. They only got 12 hours of power a day. Unemployment was rampant. Insurgent attacks were increasing constantly.
Nice.
It was more and more believed the occupation was doing more harm than good, and they started joining up with the insurgents. Every time Bremer tried to delay an election or drop a constitution with the council, the Ayatollah would release a message, and the whole thing would be fucked. The UN got involved. Bremer refused to meet with Sistani, saying Sistani was saying different stuff to different people.
Let's see.
Well, the way,
So
if somebody's
bitchy.
saying different stuff to different people, is to go sit down with them and fucking talk to them.
It's so bitchy.
It's such
like high school.
He's a little bitch. Bremer just didn't think the country was ready for voting. By the time Bremer came around to meeting with the Ayatollah wouldn't see any Americans. So now the British were sending representatives to talk to Bremer about the Ayatollah's positions, but Bremer would not listen to them. The old sticking your finger in your ears move. In the West, shit was going south fast. In March 2004, 4 American contractors were ambushed and killed in Fallujah. Bush wanted revenge. And against recommendations from the military, because they said it would look like revenge, he decided to attack Fallujah, which was largely held by insurgents now. These were soldiers and factory workers who had been let go by Bremer because they were Baathists.
Right.
So, the military attacked Fallujah. As warned, it didn't do great things to keep all smooth in the government. The Sunnis in the council demanded an end to it immediately. The military, who strangely believed that you shouldn't start something unless you plan on finishing it, were told to stop the attack.
Interesting.
They estimated they were 2 days from taking the city. Now, some old Iraqi army generals were brought in to negotiate.
Okay.
They said they could bring in some old Iraqi Fallujah soldiers from the army to handle the situation and deal with the insurgents.
Okay.
The U.S. agreed. Strangely, it didn't go as planned.
Interesting.
The Iraqi soldiers did not go after the insurgents. They just set up checkpoints around town. They also refused to wear the new Iraqi uniforms given to them by the U.S. Instead, wore their old Iraqi uniforms.
Oh, wow. Throwbacks.
Then the checkpoints went away pretty quick.
Okay.
Then all the equipment that had been given to the Iraqi soldiers, Humvees, tons of weapons, to fight the Fallujah fight, ended up in insurgents' hands.
Good.
Because
Good. Now they have tanks.
they were insurgents the whole time.
Right. So
We brought, we
was
brought,
the
we,
slow con.
we negotiated with the enemy,
Right.
and gave them guns
But in
to
our
stop themselves.
in our defense, we
Yes.
did get a pretty good deal out of it. We kind of took them to the cleaners on that one. Imagine them negotiating like, hey, for fun, push back. Oh, fuck it. Not good enough. Shit, they're really good. I mean, they obviously seem invested. Okay, yeah, we'll do it.
We like more Humvees
Okay, yeah, for
and
sure.
many more guns.
Sure, that'll
Okay.
help. Yeah.
Do you know we are the same guys? Nothing.
Voice got super high there, so...
It's okay. I can see you.
Okay. What?
Back in Washington, the White House really, really, really wanted this thing with the Ayatollah worked out, and fast, because U.S. presidential elections were coming, and Bush needed good news.
Yeah. So what's great is he's already been on the aircraft carrier. He's already been on the...
Yeah. Mission accomplished.
Yep.
Condoleezza Rice decided Bremer had to listen to the Ayatollah about how to do the election. The UN came back in and convinced the Ayatollah elections couldn't happen until December. But Bremer kept rejecting all of the Ayatollah's demands. The way the Ayatollah wanted things, it would lead to a religious democracy, which is how the people of Iraq wanted it, but not Bremer and Cheney and Faith and company. Finally, Bremer was called to Washington, where it was hammered into his head that the U.S. presidential election was the most important thing. Bremer came back and agreed to hold elections in January 2005 for a parliament and government who would then put together a constitution. And this is exactly what the Ayatollah had wanted all along. The CPA then pushed for an election within a year, and then Iraq would be turned over by the U.S. They set it up so it would happen 4 months before the U.S. presidential election.
Perfect.
Because they wanted to do it fast to get Bush some sweet PR, the only way it could occur in such a time is if the entire country was a single electoral district. Regardless of where in Iraq he lived, they would choose from the same list of candidates. Where the insurgency was strong, not only would voting be a problem, but because of security, the Sunnis didn't have big parties anymore. The Ba'ath Party was gone. Now it was little political parties vying for control. Many wanted Bremer in the White House. Many warned Bremer in the White House that having one electoral constituency would lead to disaster. It didn't matter. They wanted to get it done. The elections were a disaster. Sunni politicians boycotted, insurgents scared people away from voting. Sunnis, who made up 20% of the population, had 8% of the seats in the legislature, so the Shiites and Kurds had majorities in the government. Then the government sat back and watched as Shiite and Kurd militias grabbed up young Sunnis, tortured them, and killed them. Yeah. Now Sunnis started attacking Shiites and Kurds instead of just Americans. Mixed religious neighborhoods in Baghdad, as they had been for decades, broke apart. Sunnis fled Shiite neighborhoods and vice versa. They were heading towards civil war. When it came time to write the Constitution, it became even worse. The Sunnis had no representation, so they hated the Constitution, and it was on. The Sunni insurgents formed al-Qaeda in Iraq in 2004, which then slowly turned into the Islamic State through different events. The U.S. pulled out its troops in December 2011. IS recruited while the Shiites used oppression in the Sunni areas. Then war broke out in Syria between Sunnis and Shiites. Soldiers went to fight there, and there they learned how to fight, and slowly ISIS formed. The Islamic State in Iraq and Syria is what we have now. When Bremer left in June 2004, he said the CPA had set up Iraq perfectly. It was now on the way to being
Was he laughing?
It was now on the way to being a democratic country with modern infrastructure and a free market. During an interview with a reporter, Bremer said Iraq had been, quote, fundamentally changed for the better. What was Bremer most proud of doing?
I can't wait to hear what his prideful moment is.
Lowering the tax rate.
Sure.
The liberalization of foreign investment laws.
Right, that went right.
And, of course, the reduction of import duties.
Yeah.
The CPA to this day cannot account for $9 billion of the $12 billion in cash it was given.
Yeah.
Cash.
Well, I mean, look.
Cash.
Yeah, it's hard. That's the problem. That's why you need to put them on the debit system.
Thank you. Former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich called Bremer, quote, the largest single disaster in American foreign policy in modern times. On December 14, 2004, Bremer was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Bush.
At the Irony Awards, right?
America's highest civil award for, quote, especially meritorious contributions to the security or national interests of the United States, to world peace, horticulture, or other significant public or private endeavors. He was also presented with the Department of Defense Award for Distinguished Public Service, and the Nixon Library offered him with the Victory of Freedom Award for demonstrating leadership and working towards peace and freedom.
It's just, can't we just...
Iraq still does not have full electricity like they did under Saddam Hussein. And now they have ISIS, who in July, after being allies with the Ba'ath Party, decided to go with de-Baathification and purged all the Baathists. Word is things are not running as smoothly after the purge.